Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Daryl Van Tongeren thinks the secret to success comes from the quiet power of an ancient virtue. Let's find out more from Daryl. Daryl, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, that's a great introduction. I stole it from the cover of your book, and the book is called Humble. So now we've given that away to our audience. How would you define the word humility?
Yeah, I think there's two ways of thinking about humility. So the first way is to think about humility as being the right size. So not too big in a situation and not too small in a situation. So if we're too big in a situation, the ditch that we have to worry about falling into is that of narcissistic arrogance. And if we're too small in a situation, we have to worry about servility or shrinking down and not living into our expertise. So humility is about being the right size. But another way to think about it is humility is about knowing ourselves, checking ourselves, and going beyond ourselves. So by knowing ourselves, we have an accurate view of ourselves, including our strengths and our weaknesses. When we check ourselves, we can rein in our selfish motivations and desire for our own ego. And when we go beyond ourselves, we can take other people's perspectives and value their needs as much as we value our own.
Now, I enjoyed going through your book and preparing the show. And again, the book's title is simply one word, humble. But I've got to put you on the line here. Isn't that totally out of the area we're in today with everybody? I mean, I see every sports player, they have to show off and they have to go out of their way. And an actor or actress seems to have to do something more and more outrageous. However we would define that, sometimes it's almost a crime or it leads to criminal behavior, or it's just so far out there that we're shocked. Are there any more humble people other than you and I?
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. Humility is a wildly countercultural idea. And in fact, our culture, the moving sidewalk in our culture is always going to be towards self-aggrandizement, always towards self-promotion, and towards making sure that other people know how important we are. But the problem with that is that all this focus on self-esteem, all this self-aggrandizing, all this self-promotion has made us more lonely, more miserable, more anxious, and more depressed than we've ever been before. Mental health problems are skyrocketing in our country. And of course, there's a number of reasons for that. But you have to imagine that if a wide number of people in a society are unwell, you have to wonder, are the frameworks that are guiding that culture, guiding that society, healthy and aligned with what it takes for humans to thrive? Or do we need to rethink how we organize our culture and how we organize our society? So the short answer is yes, humility is wildly countercultural, but the scientific evidence suggests it's exactly what we need.
Now, there's so many great topics we have, and so many topics that would be an instant seller, like if you said how to get rich in 4.5 minutes, or how to get rich in a week or your money back, something like that. This is the kind of stuff we see on late night TV. What caused you to study humility? Were you bad in class and they said, this is going to be your topic? Or did you actually say, wait, that's what I want to study?
Right. Well, it certainly wasn't to try to, do the get rich quick, because I do realize that humility is a hard sell. So for me, what got me into humility was in graduate school, I started studying forgiveness. And the more we were studying forgiveness, the more we were realizing the people who were able to forgive and the people who were forgiven were those that were humble. So if somebody offended me and they were quick to offer contrition, they admitted to what they did, they showed remorse, these are humble individuals who can admit when they were wrong. And we started thinking, well, maybe there's more to this relational dynamic of forgiveness and healthy relationships. And so we started turning our attention toward forgiveness. So a number of my colleagues and I started investigating this ancient virtue that philosophers and theologians had long said was really important, but scientists and psychologists were slower to start investigating.
Now, forgiveness, that sounds, again, one of those old school, I don't know if you call them bromides or religious theories. And I like them, by the way. When I'm doing that, I'm expressing this as part of our interview. But isn't that something almost from the past? Like, we see this posturing by everybody, even the people we respect in society, some politicians, doctors, religious leaders. We look at them and say, oh, my gosh, is there anybody who's humble anymore?
Yeah, so forgiveness, humility, both of these things really are longer standing, more traditional, ancient virtues, right? They're things that philosophers have talked about, poets and writers have written long about. And even though it seems like there are increasingly fewer people that get the attention that are humble, I would argue that there's still a number of people out there that are humble, and they may just not be taking as much of the spotlight. And in fact, scientific evidence would suggest they're happier, they're in better relationships, they're actually doing better at their jobs and experiencing more personal and professional success than those that spend more of their time self-promoting, engaging in narcissistic-like behavior, or taking advantage of others.
And again, I'm with you on all these things. That's why I enjoyed your book so much. But as I'm reading it, I'm saying, who's left that's humble? Where can we find one of these humble people? Are they in a cave someplace in the back of a desert? Is there a way now, again, I'll use the sports analogy, we measure everything. And I think even when you have a speaker on TV, they tell you how many times he or she blinked, which means either they're telling the truth or they're lying or something. There's a philosophy behind it. Is there any way we can measure humility, or is there a scorecard that you keep or know about?
Yeah, so researchers have developed assessments of humility. And so there's different types of assessments. So there's a self-report version. So you can go take a scale and you can indicate the degree to which you perceive yourself as humble. But, you might find that to kind of be a rather ironic thing, because if someone's extremely humble, they give themselves a high score or a low score, and someone who's somewhat narcissistic give themselves an incredibly high score. So that's why researchers have also developed a similar type of measure that someone who knows you well can fill out for you. So one of the best ways we can assess people's humility is ask people who are in relationships with you. And from a range of relationships, people you work with, your friends, your family, romantic partners. And these people can give kind of a converging 360 evaluation of your humility. And so you might find that you are rather humble at work, but maybe you're a jerk at home. Or maybe you're very kind with your friends, but you're a little bit more narcissistic in the office.
So we can have two humility personalities. Is that what I'm hearing? Our work at home and maybe in our recreational life or something else?
Right. So we would hope that someone who is truly humble, they would be humble across different domains, right? And their humility would permeate. But it's also more likely the case that our humility and how we express it is a little bit more context dependent. And like you said, maybe you're very humble at work, but when you get out on the tennis court, a different person emerges and you're rubbing it in the face of the person you're playing and you're a little bit less humble. So the goal would be to be humble across domains, but it's probably likely the case that it's more contextually dependent.
And, now that you're saying that, again, I'm thinking with some athletes that we hear about that, that you'll see them being very rough or tough on the field or expressive and anything but humble. And yet people say in, personal life, he or she is so quiet. They're a delight to be near, but they become, I'm going to say, almost an animal or a vicious competitor when they're either in the ring or on the field or the arena, whatever the sporting ground is called.
Right. And so maybe they've developed some relational humility at home. Exactly.
I'm just wondering, I'm picturing a silly problem when you work with other people in your field. And I'm guessing there are many people who do this and this kind of research, et cetera. When you have a breakthrough, do each of you go, well, it's due to you? No, it's due to you. No, it's due to you. No, I don't want the credit. Does that?
Well, you would hope that a lot of humility researchers, when you get together in the room, would be paragons of humility. But we too, just like everybody else, are human, and sometimes even we humility researchers get a little bit protective or defensive of our own theories. And so I would say for all of us, humility researchers as well, we're not exempt from this. We're all a work in progress moving toward more humility.
And I'm just thinking of this, and you'll probably laugh at me now and then think of it tomorrow and say, there might be an idea. I see this as a new comedy show. And like we had the Big Bang Theory with the physicist nerds, et cetera, that you have this company that writes books and articles on humility and talks about it and does research. And I think you could have a lot of fun with that in many venues. So you might have a career in Hollywood after this. Everyone else keeps putting everyone else up for a promotion, right? And or if they get offered a promotion, they say, well, did you think about someone down the hall? Perfect. I think you have a lot of scenarios you could work with and a second career to look at. I guess when we look at humility, what would be the opposite of someone who's humble? I mean, we think of an image, but is there a word that would describe it or the way you would in your field?
Yeah, so probably either we would use the word someone who's arrogant or someone who's narcissistic, right? So the opposite of humility would be narcissistic arrogance. And that's usually what we come up with, someone who's too big, they're overinflated, they have a sense of entitlement, their ego is bigger than is warranted. But probably less thought of, but equally just as unhumble or showing a lack of humility is someone who's too small in a situation, someone who's servile. So someone who changes their mind just because they want to not disappoint other people, or they don't live into their expertise. I can't imagine being in a situation where, let's say I needed a brain surgery and my neurosurgeon came in and he said, "Hey, Daryl, I was going to do the surgery, but I don't know, what do you think we should do in this situation?" That's actually not a situation I want to weigh in on, right? I want to defer to the expertise of my neurosurgeon. And so that also would not be humility. So humility really is that golden mean where you have arrogance on one side, but this servility or this kind of wishy-washiness on the other side.
Yeah, that's right. When you have a brain surgeon or a heart surgeon, you really don't want them to say, "Well, what do you think? Should we do the operation or not? Or should we wait a couple more weeks?" No, I want them to be decisive, and they know certainly more about their expertise than I do. So
that's exactly right.
At this point in the show, Daryl, I want to remind our listeners that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Daryl Van Tongeren. He's the author of the book, Humble. Daryl, we're going to ask you where the book is available and if there's a website where we can find out more information.
Yep. So the book is available wherever books are sold, as well as Amazon.com. You can find out more information on my website, DarylVanTongeren.com.
Daryl, I was just thinking as we were, breaking for the announcement, when you go into a company or if you work with a business, is there any way that the scores of humility correlate with something positive that we would want to see, like good sales or better athletes, or I'm trying to think of different businesses, higher ratings for maybe lawyers or doctors or accountants?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the unsung values of humility. A lot of people think if you want to be successful at work, you want to be successful in your business life, you kind of have to be a ruthless shark. But the research is actually quite clear when it comes to leadership. Humility is that secret ingredient that's going to help people become more successful. And so Jim Collins talks a little bit about it in his book, Good to Great, when he's talking about level 5 leaders. Level 5 leaders are hard driving, but they're also humble. So one of the ways we think about humility is a little bit like a social oil. So if you're running a really high velocity engine, right? You've got this great performance engine, and that's kind of the metaphor for your job. And work is very demanding. You're going to need an oil to kind of keep the gears from grinding out and wearing down. So humility is that social oil. And so what we see is leaders that are humble, they have higher employee retention, better employee health, they have better productivity. Their teams are more creative because their teams feel like they can come up with ideas without fearing that their ideas are not any good or that their ideas are being rejected. So there's this whole host of positive benefits to embracing humility at work.
And this is something you what's the word I want to look at? Metrics-wise, you could give us numbers. I mean, if we were to sit with you, some research either you did or one of your coworkers, and you'd probably give them all the credit. But for something like that, this can be shown that the humility would actually work. Am I correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's a long list of research on humility. So to give credit where credit is due, Brad Owens at Brigham Young University is one of the leading researchers in humility and leadership. And one of the findings in this is humility is often a counterbalance for some of those strong personalities that you need to be a leader in the business world. And so it's not necessarily that one has to be meek, but it's that humility can counterbalance some of that strength and confidence that comes with leading a large group.
That's a good point. You use that word meek, and most of us want to stay away from that. No, I'm not meek. That's not me. But they are different. Am I correct? Humility and being meek?
They are. I really think about humility as a sense of security. So somebody who is secure, they're able to look at their strengths and weaknesses, and they're not threatened by that. They can admit their weaknesses because they have strength. They can restrain their ego, and they can share the credit and accept some of the blame, again, because they're secure. They can take the perspectives of other people and prioritize other people's needs because, again, they're secure knowing their own needs are going to get met. So I think humility is a strength. I don't see humility as a weakness.
To be honest, that's the way I've always seen it. I didn't put it in your words, but if a professional person I'm dealing with is dealing with me in a, I'm going to say humble fashion, meaning just giving me instructions, telling me the laws of accountancy or the federal tax laws or, answering a medical question, I see that as a great strength, and I draw strength from them. Like you said, the doctor, if he or she says you need the operation, okay, we'll both do our best if I have to drink certain liquids or eat certain foods, etc. But does this go in waves, like in time through history? Like, will there be a period where humility will come back because we see everybody has to do a dance if they hit a home run or score a touchdown or kick a field goal?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing particularly high levels of what seems like narcissistic behavior right now, or at least self-promoting or self-aggrandizing behavior. We're seeing that now. I think we've been on this path for a while. I think that there have been some trends that have been leading us this way. We can hope that we move toward a more humble culture, more humble society, but I think we have to be part of that change.
You mentioned 3 current trends that are leaving us miserable. Can you talk about those?
Yeah. So the first trend I think that we're seeing is that a lot of us are seeking our value in external sources of worth. And so we're putting our self-worth in how many Twitter followers we have, how many Instagram followers or likes we get on a particular tweet or Instagram post or story, right? Our perceived beauty or attractiveness, how much money we have. There's always going to be people with more followers, with more influence, with more money, who we perceive as being more attractive, who are doing more interesting things on their vacation or on their Instagram stories than we are. And so that's a never-ending series of disappointments because there's always someone who will outperform us on one of these metrics. And so what we're doing is we're giving our sense of happiness and worth to other people instead of finding non-contingent sources of worth, instead of finding security and worth from within rather than from people who we're comparing ourselves to. The second trend is we're really narrowing the scope and range of attitudes and opinions and viewpoints that we're exposing ourselves to. So we're ensconcing ourselves in these echo chambers. So we're only going to news sources that validate what we already believe. We're surrounding ourselves with friends that believe similar things that we do. And so we're not exposing ourselves to a diversity of ideas. And then the last thing is, this third trend is we have this very strong desire for positive self-regard. We want other people to tell us that we're great and we need to think that we're above average. And all of us need to think that we're above average. Although you don't have to be a whiz at math to realize we can't all be above average on everything, right? Some of us have to be below average, at least on some dimensions. And so when we put our worth in other people's hands, when we only surround ourselves with people who believe the same things as we do, and when we always need to feel good and have a high sense of self-esteem, that's going to be a recipe for closed-mindedness, for arrogance, and for a sense of superiority, not a sense of humility.
It seems almost the less we know, the more we have to self-promote or be a loudmouth, if you want to call it, or I may be using the wrong terms, but it almost seems like we have to push that aspect, like whatever it is we're trying to convince you that the home team is the best baseball, football, basketball team or whatever. Does that seem to play out?
Yeah, often what you find is that, the more people learn, the more they realize how little indeed they do know, right? That the world is so much bigger, that there's so much more knowledge out there. Now, that's not to say that experts should discount their expertise or their schooling or their training, but rather, I think they have a deeper appreciation and a wider sense that there's so much to learn and we should be eager to learn.
When you meet a new group, or if you go into a business to give a lecture or seminar, do you give them a test? And is there a way to see from either 10 questions or an essay or however you might do it, who the non-humble people are and who the most humble people, or is it just a vote from the coworkers? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, so there are scales. There's like a 15-item relational humility scale if you're interested in that dimension of humility. There's also scales for intellectual or cultural humility. But, one of the kind of easy and basic ways that you can get a sense of how humble people are, and your listeners can do this, but I'll warn them, if they do this, they have to be ready for the feedback. Just ask someone you trust. And you can ask a couple people that you trust, how humble am I? Right. But make sure you trust those people for 2 reasons. First of all, you want them to tell you the truth, right? You don't want it to be someone who's really motivated to make sure you feel good about yourself. You want the truth. But then the second thing is, when they tell you how humble you are, you better accept that and not get defensive. So the first time I ever did a media interview on humility, this was on a Friday during the summer, and I had promised my wife that we were going to go to the beach at 11. But I took the interview at 11. And so my wife was very gracious, and I assured her, oh, it's just going to be a 15-minute interview. Well, it turned out to be about an hour-long interview. And right at the end of the interviewee asked me if I could get an assessment from someone that I knew well, that I trusted, perhaps my wife, on how humble I am. Because they wanted to see, well, does studying humility actually make you any more humble? And so here I was, I'd made my wife wait a whole hour. She had, very kindly packed the lunches, packed the beach bag. She was ready to go. So I come upstairs after having her wait an hour. And before she can say anything or I can say anything, I say, hey, by the way, do you mind just driving to the beach and lugging all of our stuff out there? Because, I was training for a marathon at the time, and the beach was 7 miles away. And lo and behold, I needed to get a 7-mile run in that day. So I made her wait. She packed up everything. Then I asked her to drive and lug everything out to the beach while I run for 7 miles. Then at the very end, I said, oh yeah, by the way, on a scale of 1 to 10, how humble am I? And she kind of chuckled, and she looked at me and said, 1 to 10, I think I'd give you a 4. At the moment, that felt pretty harsh, but looking back, I think that was pretty generous. I think in that moment, the way I was acting, a 4 was a higher score than was warranted.
Now, the question our whole audience wants to know, I'm sorry to interrupt, are you still married to that same woman?
I am, yes. And that says so much about her, probably more about her.
I was going to say, yes, exactly.
She gives me this feedback. And immediately I start getting defensive, right? Oh, I start trying to list all the ways that I'm humble. You can't do that, right? You can't try to prove to somebody that you're humble. That's just akin to bragging, right? So that was actually a pretty powerful moment for me, and for us to kind of unpack that and realize there are moments in which I can be extremely self-involved and extremely self-focused. And even somebody who studies this and really was just doing an interview on this can easily get caught up and kind of lose a sense. And so it kind of requires a daily work towards being more humble, but a good start is to ask people around you.
Daryl, once again, I want to let our audience know if you're enjoying this show and you're hearing some new information, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Daryl Van Tongeren. That's spelled VanTongeren. He's the author of the book Humble. That's what we're talking about. Simple one-word title. And Daryl, would you tell us where we can get the book and how we can find out more information?
Yep. So the book is sold wherever books are sold, in local bookstores as well. You can find it on Amazon, and then you can get more information at darylvantongeren.com.
Okay. Now, Daryl, now it's my turn, and I have to put the guest on the spot every once in a while, so I won't ask you anything that would be embarrassing. But let's say I'm sitting here with one of the richest people in the world, and they say, I love this guy, Daryl Van Tongeren. He's a doctorate. He's written a book. He's an author. He's co-editor of, what's the title of the magazine?
The associate editor of the Journal of Positive Psychology.
So you've checked all the boxes, and they want to put you head of this company, but you're going to do the hiring. Would you actually look to the person's humility as people come in? And, either give them a checklist or have that as part of, if you were actually, of course, in a big company, you wouldn't be doing the interviews, but would that be something you would want to be part of it, knowing all that you know about humility?
I would say absolutely, without reservation. Everything we know about humility, any type of sociological, cultural, or technological advance in any capacity has required some degree of humility, right? You need intellectual humility to say, I don't know something, but I'm curious enough to want to go out and to learn it. And so to me, from the frontline workers all the way up to management, I would want everybody in between and along the way to be humble. I would want us to embrace a place where we could make mistakes, where we would support each other and listen to each other's perspectives, and where it's okay to get things wrong as long as we're learning, as long as we're curious, and we're treating each other with respect.
Now, you mentioned humility. The way to know about this is, I guess, to look at it as being aware of yourself. Is that right?
Yep. So being aware of ourselves, kind of checking our selfish motives, and then thinking about other people.
Is that easy for people to do or very hard? Because aren't we biased to think, I'm pretty good. It's the other man or woman who's making the trouble around here.
Oh, absolutely. This is very hard. So when I tell people I study humility, they're like, oh, humility, that's what I want all my friends or my romantic partner or my family to have, right? They say, I'm going to give your book to my father-in-law, right? So a lot of people want other people to be humble, but they don't necessarily want to do the hard work themselves of becoming more humble. So self-awareness is difficult. We have these cognitive biases that work against us. We think we're better than average. We blame others when things go wrong, but we take credit when things go right. And in fact, we're so biased that we think that we're not as biased as other people are biased. We're even biased about our own bias. So self-awareness is difficult.
Are there any professions where you would say humility can perhaps fall back a bit? And what I'm thinking of, I've seen actors and actresses say, they had to put themselves out there, or they went to 20 auditions before they got their first role. A lot of us would have said 2 or 3 auditions, I mustn't be any good because they're not hiring me. Maybe I should be a teacher, an accountant, or go back to school. Are there any that you would say this profession is where you want to be very forceful, very unhumble?
Yeah, that's a good question. I certainly think that there are professions where, at least on the exterior, seems to reward a lack of humility, right? So to the degree that you can make things about yourself, that you can center yourselves in conversations, that sometimes that's rewarded, whether that's in entertainment, whether that's in information sharing, or trying to be some type of information or entertainment or lifestyle influencer. The degree that you can make that more about yourself probably is more rewarded. The downside is, though, psychologically, relationally, socially, we do better when we act humbly, when we treat other people humbly, and when we're treated humbly by others.
And to be honest, I would be just a perfect student for you, because if a salesman was very humble and said, I want to tell you, this is a very good product, but there are others out there, right away, I would tend to believe them, because they're telling me there's others, but it might cost me $10,000 more, and maybe I don't want to spend that much. So if I'm looking for something in this price range, in this area, etc., their product might be the best for me. Not necessarily the best in the world, but maybe I don't need the finest telescope or rifle or whatever I'm buying.
Right, and I think that that's the way it works a lot of times. Is humility is a signal of trust. If someone's humble with us, and we perceive that they're humble, we feel like we can trust them.
Well, I want to be trusted, so I'm going to take your advice and try to be more humble. I'm going to go through your book, outline it some more, and try to pick up some of your stories. But for our audience, before we wrap up, once again, tell us where we can get the book and the website.
Yep, you can find the book in local bookstores or on Amazon.com. And my website is DarylVanTongeren.com.
Daryl, thank you so much for being with us today. We greatly appreciate it and the good advice you've given us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.